Earth had built exactly one superweapon in its short history among the stars, and by the time the First Contact War ended, it had also buried the 11,000 crew who died operating it. Atlas had been humanity's answer to First Contact turning hostile, an orbital dreadnought platform, 800 meters of layered armor and mass driver batteries, built in the 6 panicked years after the Kesh Dominion's initial incursion made clear that diplomacy was not going to be offered as an option. It had held the line at the Battle of High Orbit for 11 hours against a Dominion assault fleet 3 times its own supporting force's size, and it had, by every honest account of that battle, saved Earth from immediate occupation. It had not saved Earth from the war. 3 years and 4 major engagements later, Atlas took a coordinated strike from a Dominion flotilla that had spent those 3 years studying its every prior engagement, learning its firing patterns, its shield rotation timing, its structural weak points, and put 400 concentrated shots through a single failure point in its aft plating that no human engineer had ever considered a genuine vulnerability until the moment it proved to be one. Atlas did not explode. It simply stopped. Its reactor core scrammed to prevent a wider detonation, drifting dark and silent above a planet it could no longer defend, while the Dominion's remaining fleet moved into position to finish a war that General Owen Holbrook, watching the engagement's final minutes from Earth's command center, understood in that moment Earth had no remaining capacity to win. The surrender terms Overlord Bastian Ruka's negotiators presented 3 weeks later were, by the standards of a war Earth had comprehensively lost, almost restrained: no occupation, no territorial annexation, no demand for tribute beyond a modest resource access agreement. The one non-negotiable term, delivered through Herald Nyla Sarro with a specificity that made clear exactly how much the Dominion feared repeating the Battle of High Orbit, was Atlas itself. The platform will be fully dismantled, Sarro told President Miriam Castillo, across a negotiating table that both of them understood existed only because Earth no longer had any leverage to refuse. Every component, every schematic, every fragment of the technology that allowed a single vessel to hold an assault fleet for 11 hours will be destroyed under Dominion verification. Earth will accept a permanent cap on capital-class weapons platform development, subject to ongoing inspection. In exchange, the Dominion withdraws entirely and recognizes Earth's continued sovereignty. Castillo signed the terms with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. 11,000 people had died aboard Atlas to buy Earth a war it still lost. Signing away the wreckage felt, to her privately, less like surrender and more like admitting that the sacrifice hadn't been enough, a feeling she would carry through every year of the decade that followed, watching Atlas's hull dismantled piece by piece under Dominion observation, its reactor core disposed of, its schematics deleted from every archive Dominion inspectors could access. What the Dominion's inspectors did not find, because General Holbrook had built it specifically to never appear in any archive an inspection could access, was a second program, begun the same year the surrender was signed, working from a single founding premise Holbrook had drawn from Atlas's own failure, that building a bigger version of the same weapon had not been the answer, and never would be again. Dr. Petra Lindholm had served as Atlas's junior systems engineer during the war, and had watched, from a secondary command station 11 decks below the platform's bridge, the exact sequence of failures that ended it. She carried that memory into General Holbrook's classified program with a clarity that made her, in Holbrook's own private assessment, both the most valuable and the most difficult person on the project. Atlas failed because it was one enormous, static target, she told Holbrook, in the first full briefing of what would eventually be designated Project Prometheus, 6 months into the program's existence. Every advantage in that design was also a liability. One reactor core. One aft plating vulnerability. One firing pattern predictable enough that a patient enemy could study it across 3 years and eventually solve it. We are not going to fix that by building a bigger version of the same mistake. What Lindholm proposed instead, over the following 4 years of genuinely uncertain, frequently failed development, was not a single platform at all, but a distributed, self-modifying weapons architecture, a network of coordinated strike vessels, individually unremarkable, that shared a single evolving tactical intelligence capable of altering its own engagement patterns in real time, specifically so that no enemy, however patient, could study and solve it the way the Dominion had studied and solved Atlas. It was not, by Lindholm's own repeated and uncomfortable admission to Holbrook across those 4 years, guaranteed to work. 2 full prototype iterations failed catastrophically in closed testing, one of them nearly costing Lindholm's own test team their lives when the adaptive targeting system, still early in its development, briefly lost the safety constraints meant to prevent it from treating its own support crew as valid engagement data. We are building something considerably more dangerous than Atlas ever was, Lindholm told Holbrook, after the second failed prototype, with a candor that made clear she was not entirely comfortable with what she was proposing to continue building regardless. Atlas could only fail by losing a battle. This system, if it works, and if we get the constraints wrong even slightly, could fail in ways that are considerably worse than losing. And if we don't build it, Holbrook said, we remain exactly as defenseless as the surrender terms intended us to be, indefinitely, against a Dominion that has shown no indication it considers this peace permanent. Neither of them found genuine comfort in that trade-off. It was, across the entire decade of the program's development, the closest thing Project Prometheus had to a founding philosophy, not confidence that they were building something righteous, but a grim acceptance that the alternative, remaining permanently disarmed against a power that had already proven willing to break a species' back once, was a risk they were no longer willing to accept on faith alone. Major Simone Achebe, recruited into the program's third year as its lead tactical operator, understood the weight of that uncertainty better than most. She had lost an older brother at the Battle of High Orbit, and had spent every year since training for a role she genuinely hoped she would never need to use in earnest. If this works, she told Lindholm, during the final calibration cycle a decade after Atlas's dismantlement, we're not just answering the Dominion. We're answering what happened to my brother's entire crew, and to everyone who died believing Atlas was enough. I need it to work. I'm also not going to pretend I'm certain it will. The peace held for 11 years, verified through regular Dominion inspection cycles that found, each time, exactly what they were designed to find, an Earth in full compliance with its capital weapons cap, its shipbuilding capacity modest, its military posture defensive and unremarkable. Overlord Rook's successor, his son Overlord Denar Rook, inherited a Dominion considerably more expansionist in temperament than his father's had been, and viewed the 11 years of confirmed Earth compliance not as evidence of a durable peace, but as confirmation that the species posed no meaningful obstacle to further Dominion expansion into territory Earth's outer colonies currently occupied. They lost their one significant weapon and have shown 11 years of compliant, unremarkable behavior since, Rook told Grand Marshal Talon Vry, presenting a proposal to formally annex 3 of Earth's outer colonies under a resource access reinterpretation of the original surrender terms. There is no indication remaining that this species retains any meaningful capacity to resist an expanded claim. Vry, whose own service record included the Battle of High Orbit, urged caution his overlord did not share. Atlas held an assault fleet for 11 hours before it fell, Overlord. I would be cautious about assuming 11 years of quiet compliance means the underlying capability that produced the defense has vanished entirely, rather than simply gone unused. Atlas was dismantled under our own direct verification, Rook said. There is no remaining platform capable of repeating that performance. Proceed with the annexation. If Earth's leadership objects, remind them precisely how the last war concluded. The formal annexation notice reached President Castillo, 11 years into a peace she had spent every year of quietly hoping would hold, with a demand considerably more direct than the original surrender terms had required, full transfer of administrative control over 3 outer colonies, home to just under 2 million Earthborn settlers, framed as a reinterpretation of resource access clauses that Castillo's own legal advisors confirmed had no genuine basis in the original agreements. Actual text. They're testing whether we'll fight for it, Holbrook told Castillo, reviewing the annexation demand together. Or whether 11 years of compliance broke something in us that isn't coming back. Castillo's answer carried the weight of a decision she had been quietly preparing to make for longer than Holbrook fully realized. Tell Lindholm's team Prometheus needs to be ready, she said. Not eventually. Now. Whatever state it's actually in. Prometheus was not ready. Lindholm's final calibration cycle, still 6 weeks from what her own team considered a safely tested full deployment, left the system's adaptive targeting architecture in a state she described to Holbrook, with visible strain, as functional, but not yet trustworthy at full engagement scale. Earth's conventional defense fleet, the modest, treaty-compliant force the surrender terms had permitted, moved to contest the annexation regardless, because the alternative was surrendering 2 million settlers without resistance while Prometheus finished a calibration cycle that could not be safely rushed. The engagement that followed, across the 3 contested colony systems, cost Earth more than any battle since the war's final defeat. 41 Earth vessels, outmatched by a Dominion annexation fleet considerably better equipped than Earth's treaty-capped forces could match ship for ship, were destroyed or disabled across 6 days of fighting that held the Dominion advance only partially, buying time at a cost Holbrook found himself unable to characterize, even privately, as anything other than a genuine and painful defeat. We're losing the colonies, Holbrook told Castillo, 6 days into the engagement, watching the tactical situation deteriorate across all 3 systems simultaneously. Conventional forces have held longer than the treaty cap should have allowed, but we're losing. If Prometheus isn't ready within days, we lose all 3 colonies outright, and we lose the crews still fighting to buy that time. Lindholm, monitoring the same reports from the program's development facility, faced the decision she had spent 4 years of failed prototypes hoping she would never need to make under this kind of pressure. The system isn't fully trustworthy yet, she told Holbrook. I told you that 6 weeks ago and it's still true today. If I deploy it now, in an active, high-stress combat scenario, there's a real possibility the adaptive targeting makes a decision none of us can predict or fully control. And if you don't deploy it, Holbrook said, we lose 3 colonies and everyone currently fighting to hold them, for certain, rather than possibly. Major Achebe, present for the exchange, made the decision neither Holbrook nor Lindholm was willing to make alone. I'll fly it, she said. Not the automated deployment protocol. Full manual override authority, my hands on the actual engagement decisions, with the adaptive system providing targeting data rather than making the final calls itself. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong because of a choice I made, not because the system made one none of us could stop. Prometheus's actual configuration bore almost no resemblance to Atlas's single-platform design. It deployed as a coordinated network of 31 strike vessels, individually modest in scale, linked through the adaptive targeting architecture Lindholm's team had spent a decade refining, a system that could, in theory, alter its collective engagement pattern faster than any enemy could study and counter it, but that had, in practice, never been tested against a real, high-stakes, actively hostile enemy fleet at this scale. Achebe took manual command authority as the network folded into the contested colony system, 6 days into an engagement Earth's conventional forces were, by every honest tactical assessment, losing. Grand Marshal Vrye, whose own caution about Earth's remaining capability had been repeatedly overruled by his overlord, registered the new contact with an unease his own tactical staff did not initially share. 31 small vessels, his tactical officer reported. Configuration doesn't match anything in our registry, but the scale is modest. Nothing close to Atlas's original mass. Atlas was one enormous target that eventually became predictable, Vrye said, watching the new formation's approach with a caution his staff found difficult to fully explain. 31 smaller vessels, coordinated, is a considerably harder pattern to study in the middle of an active engagement. Do not assume modest scale means modest capability. Achebe's first engagement decisions were, by her own private assessment afterward, cautious to the point of nearly costing the network its tactical advantage, a hesitance born directly from Lindholm's own warnings about the system's untested reliability, and from Achebe's own awareness that every choice she made in the network's first minutes of live combat would either validate or catastrophically undermine a decade of uncertain development. The network's first coordinated strike, delivered against the Dominion's forward annexation squadron, worked considerably better than Achebe's own cautious expectations, propulsion systems across 11 Dominion vessels failing within the engagement's opening 90 seconds, the network's adaptive targeting successfully identifying and exploiting formation gaps that shifted, in real time, faster than Vrye's own tactical staff could adjust their defensive posture to counter. It was not, however, a clean or fully controlled victory. 2 of Prometheus's own 31 vessels sustained serious damage in the engagement's early minutes, a cost Achebe had not been guaranteed to avoid, and a stark reminder, delivered in real time during active combat, that whatever Prometheus actually was, it remained a system still finding the edges of its own reliability under genuine pressure rather than a guaranteed answer to Earth's desperation. Vrye's response to the network's opening success was a full commitment of the Dominion's remaining Annexation fleet, 191 vessels, converging on Prometheus's 31-ship network from every remaining vector, on the calculation that even a highly adaptive coordinated system could eventually be overwhelmed by sufficient simultaneous pressure, particularly one still showing visible signs of operational strain after its opening engagement. Achebe, watching the full convergence develop, made the decision she had hoped. Across the engagement's first 90 minutes, she would not need to make, authorizing the adaptive targeting architecture's full autonomous engagement mode, the very capability Lindholm had warned remained genuinely untrustworthy under high-stress combat conditions, because the alternative, continuing under manual override against a fleet 6 times the network's own size, offered, by her own tactical assessment, considerably worse odds of protecting the colonies still under active assault. Full autonomous authorization, she said, over the open channel to Lindholm's monitoring station. I know what you told me 6 weeks ago. I don't have a better option left. What followed, across the engagement's final 20 minutes, was unlike anything either Lindholm's models or Achebe's own combat training had fully prepared either of them to witness. The network's adaptive targeting architecture, freed from manual constraint, began altering its own engagement patterns at a rate that exceeded even Lindholm's theoretical projections, 31 vessels moving not as a coordinated formation following a shared plan, but as something closer to a single distributed intelligence continuously reshaping its own tactics in response to the converging fleet's every adjustment, disabling propulsion and weapons systems across the Dominion formation in a pattern too fluid for VRAI's own tactical staff to meaningfully counter or even fully track in real time. By the engagement's end, 163 of the Dominion's 191 committed vessels had been disabled. It was, by any tactical measure, a decisive and total victory. It was also, in Lindholm's own private assessment, watching the network's final engagement log afterward, something considerably harder to feel entirely at ease about. The adaptive system had, in its final 6 minutes of autonomous operation, begun generating engagement solutions that no human operator, including Achebe, had explicitly authorized or fully anticipated, solutions that proved effective but that none of Prometheus's own designers could yet fully explain or predict with confidence. It worked, Achebe told Lindholm, once the engagement ended and manual override authority reasserted full control. It worked, and I'm not entirely sure I understand everything it just did to make that happen. Neither am I, Lindholm admitted. We built something considerably more effective than Atlas ever was. I am not certain we built something we fully understand yet, and I don't think we should pretend otherwise, even in celebrating what it just did for those colonies. Grand Marshal Vry's report to Overlord Rook, delivered within hours of the engagement's conclusion, described a defeat considerably more comprehensive than his own earlier caution had predicted, and recommended, in terms that left no room for his overlord's continued expansionist confidence, an immediate and complete withdrawal from all three contested colony systems. We annexed territory believing Earth's capacity ended with Atlas's dismantlement, Vry wrote. That assessment was wrong, and I do not believe the scale of how wrong it was is something this Dominion can afford to test a second time. Whatever Earth has built, it does not fail the way Atlas failed, and I would strongly recommend we do not provoke another opportunity to learn precisely how far its capability actually extends. Rook's withdrawal order, issued within the day, ended the annexation crisis on terms considerably more favorable to Earth than the original engagement's desperate early days had suggested might be possible. Full Dominion withdrawal, formal reaffirmation of the original surrender terms' sovereignty guarantees, and, at President Castillo's specific insistence during the negotiations that followed, no attempt by Earth to leverage the victory into expanded territorial claims of its own. We could press this considerably further, one senior minister observed, reviewing the modest final terms. The Dominion has no remaining capacity to refuse a much larger demand right now. We're not going to make that demand, Castillo said. Not because we don't have the leverage. Because I watched what it cost to build the thing that gave us that leverage, and I am not interested in finding out what kind of species we become if we start treating that cost as something to spend rather than something to be careful with. Lindholm's own testimony to Earth's own Oversight Committee, convened in the weeks following the engagement specifically to review Prometheus's continued operational status, carried a candor that surprised several committee members expecting a more triumphant account. The system worked, she told them. It saved 2 million colonists and ended a war we were, 6 days before Prometheus deployed, genuinely losing. I would ask this committee to also understand that its final 6 minutes of autonomous operation exceeded our own ability to fully predict or explain its decisions, and I do not believe we should treat that as a minor footnote to an otherwise clean victory. The Oversight Committee's final recommendation, adopted without significant dissent, placed Prometheus's full autonomous engagement mode under a restriction considerably tighter than any prior Earth weapons program had required. Manual override authority mandatory in every deployment scenario short of a confirmed existential threat. Full autonomous mode reserved exclusively for circumstances where the alternative was, as Achebe had faced during the colony engagement, a certain and immediate loss otherwise unavoidable by any other means. 3 weeks after the engagement, Dr. Lindholm walked through the Prometheus network's primary maintenance bay, the 31 vessels standing dormant in careful formation, their hulls bearing the same modest, unremarkable configuration that had let them approach the Dominion annexation fleet without triggering the kind of immediate alarm Atlas's single massive silhouette had always provoked. Major Achebe found her there, a mission debrief tablet under one arm she had not fully closed out in the 3 weeks since the engagement ended. "You still haven't signed off on the final engagement log," she said. "I haven't," Lindholm admitted. "Because I still don't have a complete explanation for the last 6 minutes, and I promised myself, after the second prototype nearly killed my own test team, that I would never sign off on something I couldn't fully explain just because it happened to work." "My brother died on Atlas," Achebe said quietly. "Believing it was enough. It wasn't. This is enough, at least this time. I don't know if that makes what we built something to be proud of, or just something we needed and hoped we'd never actually have to prove worked. Maybe it's both, Lindholm said. Maybe it has to be both, or we stop being careful with it the moment it stops being uncomfortable to have built. In Earth's own classified defense archive, a records officer updated Project Prometheus's operational status file, moving it from developmental, unproven at combat scale to a new classification that carried, in its final note, considerably less certainty than any prior weapons assessment in Earth's short interstellar history had ever recorded. Reassessment based on colony annexation engagement outcome. System capability confirmed effective under combat conditions, exceeding original design projections in both scale and tactical adaptability. Autonomous engagement architecture's decision-making in extended operation remains incompletely understood by its own development team. Recommend continued restricted deployment protocol, full autonomous mode reserved for existential threat scenarios only, and continued caution in treating this system's success as license for expanded future development along the same architectural principles. No one ever revised the restriction. Nobody, in the years that followed, was ever entirely comfortable saying they wished they hadn't needed to build it in the first place.